There is seldom only one root cause. More often than not, it is more than one cause that has triggered the event. Now, in this connection, I'd like to quote National Geographic. They say, disasters do not occur. They are the result of a chain of critical events. To illustrate how failure investigations have been conducted, I will give you examples from various industries, including pharmaceuticals. Let me start with the kingdom that was lost for the want of a horseshoe nail. What actually happened? A king decides to declare war. He decides to go into war. So his soldiers prepare for war. Horses are reshoed. By the time the king's horse reaches the shoesmith, he's run out of nails. So the shoesmith tells the groom that the shoe is good enough for another 3 to 6 months. It does not require to be reshod. And in any case, if he pulls out the old shoe, he has not enough nails to put the new shoes in. The groom insists that it should be reshod. The king goes into battle, and as the shoesmith had predicted, the shoe does come off, the horse trips, it fumbles and tumbles and throws the king off. The king is on the ground, the enemies are upon him, and he's killed. And because he's killed, his soldiers and his army lose self-confidence, go into a state of panic and retreat, and the enemy attacks and destroys that army and takes over the kingdom. Now, what are the series of critical events, the chain of critical events? First, the king decides to go into war. If he had decided not to go into war, he would have been alive. Now, there is a parallel string that comes along, that because he wanted to go into war, the soldiers had to prepare. And because they had to prepare, they used up the shoe nails. Now, that is the second set of events. The shoesmith says that the horse is quite okay with the old shoe, but the groom overrides that recommendation. If any one of these had been avoided, for example, if the king did not go to war, or if all the soldiers did not go before the king's horse went there, if the king's horse had gone there first, if even when the king went last, the shoesmith's recommendation had been abided by, in any one of these cases, the chain would have been broken and the king would have been alive. The kingdom would have been safe. I'll give you another example, a bizarre example. A Concorde took off from Paris for New York, and within 150 seconds, it crashed into a hotel, killing all those on board, passengers and crew, as well as 4 to 6 additional people who were in the hotel. What went wrong? This was an airline, this was an aeroplane that had 25 years of blemish-free record. A safety record unparalleled. Then what went wrong? The voice data recorder and the flight data recorder couldn't give much information. The flight was supposed to take off at 3 o'clock. The captain got into the cockpit and reviewed the log of the earlier flight and found that there was a complaint that one of the valves, that is the throttle reverse valve, was not functioning satisfactorily. So the captain then checked the maintenance log to see if that valve had been replaced. It had not been replaced. So he rang up maintenance and asked them why, and they said it's a very minor part, non-critical part, it could be done later. But being so safety conscious, the captain insisted that it should be done before he takes off. The flight was delayed by almost 2 hours. It was supposed to have taken off at 3. It finally took off at 4:45 and within 2.5 minutes crashed. Now, what do the investigators have? They have a record that the captain had asked for a valve to be replaced. Now, could that have caused the accident? Experts immediately ruled it out. This was noise. This was not a signal. It was a misleading piece of coincidence. Now, what else did they have? They have the air control traffic person noticing as soon as the plane took off that the left wing was on fire. He communicated this to the pilot, but at that speed, the pilot could not abort the takeoff. He had to take off. He was hoping to be able to circle around and land to set the matters right, but that didn't happen. Now, what could be the reason? The investigators collected as much data as possible and were making no headway. Till somebody reported that at the far end of the runway there are some rubber pieces lying. The rubber pieces were analyzed and it was found that it belonged to a Concorde. It was a Concorde tire. But a tire burst is unheard of when a plane is taking off. Tire bursts are common when a plane lands. Nevertheless, they collected all the rubble that was there, all the debris that was there, and found that under normal tire bursts, it goes into smithereens, into small particles, very small pieces. But here was a 4 kg piece and another 800 gram piece, and the total weight of the tire itself is a little over 5 kgs. Among the debris, they found an interesting piece of tangled material. It was a strip of metal about 1 meter long. So immediately one set of the investigators tried to check whether this could be from any aircraft. Was it an aircraft part? And they searched all possible parts of all possible aircrafts and found that it did come from a DC-10. It is a piece that is very similar in dimensions, though this was twisted. The original piece seems to fit that, which is a brace to hold the engine for a DC-10. The next question was there a DC-10 anywhere in that area? And the answer was, at 4:15, the DC-10, there was a DC-10 that took off. They traced the DC-10, found it was parked in Chicago, and checked to see whether that strip was missing. It was missing. It was the same strip that had been replaced a month earlier, and it was missing. So they knew where it had come from. So now they are trying to reconstruct what might have happened. A DC-10 takes off, a metal brace falls on the air strip. A Concorde comes on, and at 323 kilometers speed just before takeoff, it goes on a metal piece which is razor sharp, and the tire bursts. And because this is an unnatural burst, huge pieces fly. Now, one of those pieces, a huge piece, went and hit the underside of the left wing. And they matched the debris and found a bump over there. It had not broken the wing or torn the wing or sheared the wing. It had just caused a bump in the wing, underside of the wing. Now, above that wing is the petrol fuel tank. Though the petrol tank was not breached, the impact was so high that it sent shock waves inside the fuel storage tank. The shock wave, following Pascal's law of uniform pressure in all directions, hurt the weakest valve in the entire system and forced open that valve. So a valve failed. And because of the valve failure, there was fuel being ejected into the environment. Now, fuel being ejected into the environment is not sufficient for an aircraft to catch fire. Just leaking aviation fuel cannot by itself ignite. There has to be a spark from somewhere. Now, where could that spark have come from? There's no electrical wiring anywhere in the area of the leak. The answer came curiously from a lady in a car who was fascinated with this fireball in the sky and videoed it. That video footage was made available to the investigators. While the lady's fascination was the fire, the investigators' fascination was the fact that the landing gear had not been pulled up. It was still left open, though the plane had ascended to beyond 3,000 feet. Then they checked that part of the wreckage and found that the landing gear part, the cable that controls the landing gear, the electric cable that controls the landing gear had been severed. Now if it is severed, it just doesn't fall. They are tethered together. So though it is severed, they are very close to each other. And because there is electric voltage, there is a possibility that there is a spark. And it was this spark that has caused that ignition of that fire. And ultimately, the plane crashed. The Concorde was supposed to take off at 3 o'clock. For the replacement of a non-critical part, they lost 1 hour and 45 minutes. And they took off eventually at 4:45. The DC-10 had taken off at 4:15. Had the Concorde taken off at 3 o'clock, probably it would have been safe. And it would still be flying today. 25 years of safety went up literally in smoke. And customer confidence was lost. Every other plane before has crashed and people have died. Many other planes have crashed subsequently and people have died. But people continue to fly those planes. But people just started fearing that that imagery of fire in the sky was so strong that the customer level fell down to a point where it was no longer viable for that airline to run Concorde. So they had to scrap it. They're all in the museum today as technical marvels. Now I'll give you another example. In 1986, USA, NASA was celebrating the 25th launch of the shuttle. Now, it was January, it was winter, and the place from where you launch the shuttle was having unseasonal inclement weather and temperatures were freezing, and the shuttle takeoff had already been delayed by 7 days. Because it was the 25th launch, they could not keep on postponing the launch. So an expert committee of people sat down to review the situation and take a call. Amongst the people sitting there was an engineer from the company that supplies the booster rockets. Now you have different sections of the rocket and one fits into the other, and in between there is an O-ring. As the temperature increases with the launch, the O-ring expands in the groove and makes sure the seal is tight. The engineer in the committee protested, saying, even though we are 7 days behind schedule, it is better that we postpone this because the temperature is so severe that the O-ring that is there would be very hard and may not expand as is required at the rate at which it is supposed to expand to see that the seal is kept intact. But they decided to override him. They said it is very unlikely. They were not convinced. So they cleared the launch and the shuttle took off, went up for around 70 seconds and then at around 58-59 seconds started shuddering, and at 73-74 seconds exploded into a ball of fire at different parts falling into the Atlantic Ocean. And all those 7 people in the shuttle perished. Now failure investigation. What are the chain of critical events? First, the inclement weather. NASA had never ever in the past ever launched a shuttle under those weather conditions. Second was the question of the O-ring. Now, if the theory of O-ring was really true, then the heat that is generated before takeoff itself is so severe that the leakage should have been noticed. What in fact did happen from one photograph was that there was indeed black smoke that was coming out from the left side booster rocket. But in few seconds, the smoke stopped. Initially, the smoke came out as a plume, and then it came out as puffs, and then finally it stopped, and then it took off. So if it was the O-ring seal problem, then the shuttle should have exploded on the ground, should never have taken off. So when it took off, the engineer heaved a sigh of relief. He was so grateful that his theory was wrong. At 58 seconds, it had reached an altitude around 1,500 feet, where it encountered a very strong cross-current jet stream moving at hurricane speeds, higher than Hurricane Katrina. In fact, 30 minutes before takeoff, a 747 Boeing had passed at that altitude and had experienced this jet stream and had reported and conveyed the message to the air traffic controller. But NASA did not get that information. So as soon as it reached that level, there was a shudder, and then it carried on. But immediately after that, there was huge black smoke coming out from the booster. And in the next 15 seconds, there was this explosion. So how do you reconstruct what happened? At ground, as soon as the temperatures heated up, the gasket, as expected, could not match the increase in its size. So there was this leakage, as predicted, as expected. But at that heat, the fuel that is there is aluminium slag formed. And those aluminium slag pellets started moving towards that exit and started blocking that hole, which is the reason why initially there was a big plume, and after that there were puffs because the pellet was going in place and falling off, another pellet was coming in place, falling off perhaps, and this went on till one final pellet came there and sealed it firmly, and the plume stopped and the liftoff was successful. But when it reached that 1,500 feet altitude, the cross current gave it such a shake that that pellet that had been holding up fell off. As soon as it fell off, the fuel leaked out, and then there was this fire, and it then melted away the fastening, the fasteners that were holding the booster rocket together, and the booster rocket fell off, it lost its balance, and everything exploded. And the bottom part of the main fuselage fell off, and therefore the entire fuel tank was exposed and it caught fire. Now, how do we see it? There was inclement weather. If the launch had been delayed, there would have been no accident. There was this leak because the O-ring was not able to effectively seal, but an aluminium pellet went across and sealed it. And had there not been any current at that 1,500 feet altitude, had it not encountered that jet stream, it would probably have gone on. It was because of a series of these critical events happening in a chain at the same time that there was this accident. There was a plane that took off from Egypt. It was a carrier of Egyptian origin, and it went up to 3,000 feet and then fell like a stone into the Red Sea, and all persons on board, crew and passengers, perished. Now, failure investigation. The airline had been receiving threats from a terrorist group which was inimical to Egypt, because the president of Egypt had just visited Israel as an overture of friendship, and many people in the Arab world did not approve. So they had received as many as 3 calls the previous week saying one of your planes will explode in the air. So the question was it because of a terrorist attack? Or was it anything else? There was one more to that, because the plane, after taking off, was intended to go to Europe. It was supposed to take a left turn over the Red Sea. Instead, it initially started taking a right turn. Now, it was also known that the president of Egypt, Hosni Mubarak, was at that point in time holidaying or resting in a resort which was generally in the direction in which the plane seemed to be heading rather than heading for Europe. The plane started moving in that direction and immediately turned sharply to the left, and so sharp that the plane went out of control and it went into the sea. The investigators ultimately looked at the wreckage and they found that the wreckage was within 100-meter diameter area. If it was a bomb explosion on board from 3,000 feet, the wreckage would have been scattered over several kilometers, as happened with Kanishka. Here it was restricted to 100 meters, the size of a football field. So they knew that it couldn't have been a bomb. And also indication from the manner in which the plane had disintegrated and the black box and flight recorder showed that the plane broke apart only after hitting the water, not in air. So here was a case where there was noise and signal available to the investigators. They were able to successfully rule out the noise, though there was a terrorist threat. So when you are an investigator, you have to cope with all the red herrings that come your way to distract you. You have to stay focused on what are the most probable causes and stick there. A lot of common sense is required, a lot of gut feeling is required, but at the same time, you should not get into what is called analysis paralysis, that you keep on analyzing without coming to any conclusion.